Hey everybody, AJ here. I am Texas Green Tea on Twitter, and this is our video number 3 of how to big a dogfighting flight sim game in Unity 3D. So we had some bullet functionality getting started in the last video. We're going to finish that up here. We're going to add some components to the bullet to make sure it's functioning correctly, and then we're going to create a gun that we're going to attach to both the planes, the player and the opponent, so that they can start firing bullets out of those guns. Alright, so let's bring in the bullet we created in the last video. I'm going to drop it here, bullet version 4, because I've done this a bunch of times. So we can see here that's an okay looking bullet. It's not the prettiest bullet in the world, but you can find better looking stuff in the asset store if you're willing to pay for it. This is the cheap, easy, free version of what we can do. So we need this bullet to behave like a bullet, and to do that there's quite a few little components that we need to add to this thing. To use a quick reference, because I have trouble remembering off the top of my head everything that we're going to need to add onto this thing. So I am using a reference of one that I did already, to remind myself, here are all of the components that I'm going to need to get a bullet behaving like a bullet. So I'm looking at my previous bullet that I've built in the past, and I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 components that I'm going to need to add. So we'll start with a couple of these that are very common. I'm going to go with a box collider and a rigid body. Let's see, in our bullet v4, let's add a rigid body. Okay, rigid body is very important because anything that has physics operations acting upon it needs to have a rigid body. A rigid body component defines the mass, the drag, the velocity, all kinds of stuff with relation to the physics engine in the game. So if your bullet's going to be flying through the scene, you really should have a rigid body on it. So that we can just kind of leave as is. That's a default rigid body from Unity. Same kind of thing with a box collider, but we will need to manipulate this one a little bit. So if you notice, it comes in with quite a large box around our bullet, and we want to reshape that so that it matches the shape and size of our bullet. So we're going to shrink this down a little bit, and on the Y definitely, on the Z absolutely, and let's make these both the same on Y and Z. I'm going to copy the Y value, put it in Z so that you can see it's squared on the end, and then I'm going to slide the X over. Whoops, not size. I want to center it, offset. There we go. So now the collider is fairly bullet shaped as well, and that's important because we're going to use this collider as a sensor to let other objects know that they've been hit by a bullet. When you use a collider as a sensor, you have to be careful about which version of the collider you're going to use. So a collider can act in one of two ways. It can actually impact objects, or it can be used as a notifier for scripts. And the way you switch from one to the other is with this is trigger checkbox. If you check it, then this green box becomes a sensor notifier. And in other words, if I hadn't done this, this green box would act like a wall or a block object that can hit things. It will impact things. Things can't penetrate it. But if I check this box, then suddenly it's as though this block is not in the scene physically. It's just there to notify script functionality. In this case, we're actually going to be using triggers on everything else in the scene. So for example, if the bullet hits a plane, the plane is going to have a notifier on it. So we don't actually need this here. We can treat this box collider just as a regular collider. Now the trouble with this is sometimes if you do want to have physics properties like a bullet impacting an object and causing its physics to react in some way, you may or may not want your box collider to be turned on as it enters the scene, because for example, if I have a gun right below the nose of this plane right here, which we're going to do in a minute, and the bullet fires out of the front of it, it may or may not be moving fast enough, depending on how we've set it up, to escape the gun and the plane without hitting it. So if your collider is large enough, for example, it might just hit it as soon as it pops into the scene. If your bullet hits your plane, then it's going to, your plane's going to shoot itself as soon as you pull the trigger, and that's quite a large problem. So sometimes with a bullet, if I do want physics properties active on this bullet, I'm going to need to add a modifier script to turn the collider on at the appropriate time. All I do in a lot of cases is turn the collider off by default, so that when it first pops into the scene, it is inactive. And then after a certain amount of time, say half a second or a quarter of a second, it has a chance to run out ahead of the plane. Then I can turn the collider on once it's cleared the plane, so the plane doesn't end up shooting itself. The way I do that is with a very simple script. I think I've named it turn collider on. Collider on. Let's see here. Maybe case sensitive on. Yeah, there we go. So it's telling me I've created that in the past, so I look for it here instead. Turn collider on, and it's a very simple script with just one property here. You see after seconds, that's the time limit after which to turn the collider on. And if we jump into that script very quickly, it's very simple. Public, which means this property is exposed in the inspector. After seconds, I specify as, let's say, 0.2 seconds. So in a fifth of a second, I want to turn the collider on once the bullet has entered the scene. All I'm doing here is when the bullet does enter the scene, I'm using the invoke function, which basically just fires any function of your choice after a specified amount of time. So after 0.2 seconds in this case, we're going to fire the trigger function, which exists right here. And so in this function, we're saying the collider that's attached to our object, this one, and its enabled property, which is this, becomes true. In other words, it's off right now, but after 0.2 seconds, we're going to toggle it on. Okay, so that's very simple. That's how I usually operate with bullets if I need to use their colliders as physics objects. What else do we need for our bullets? Let's take a look at our reference bullet here. Version 3 is one I've created in the past. So we've got a collider, we've got a rigid body, we have turn collider on we just worked on. We have two other things we need, a destroy self script and an audio source. So the destroy self script is very important for bullets. If we come back to our version 4 bullet, we don't have one of those yet. We definitely want to add that. It's pretty self-explanatory by the name, destroy self. There we go. Destroy self. Basically, this is what we call garbage collection. When you have something instantiating into a scene over and over and over again, a bullet is a very common example. You might fire several hundred of them within a span of a few seconds. If you have enough of them in the scene, they're taking up memory, they're bogging down the system, they're going to slow down your game at some point. What you want to do with something like a bullet is destroy it as soon as it's not relevant to the game anymore. So with a bullet, if you fire it and then 5 seconds later it's still in the scene, it's probably so far away that you can't even see it anymore. So it should destroy itself at that point. So the easiest thing in the world to do is to set a certain time limit for the bullet. After a certain number of seconds, the bullet should just destroy itself automatically, because it's assumed after that amount of time the bullet's not relevant to the game anymore. And so that's what this destroy self script is for. You see time until destruction. If we open this up, time until destruction is the property that I've exposed in the inspector. I usually set my bullets to something like 5 seconds if they're fast enough. Now if we pop into the destroy self script, we can see very much like the collider script that we wrote, and the one property that we have exposed is time until destruction, which feeds the amount of time we want before we invoke self-destruct. And the self-destruct script simply says destroy whatever object this script is attached to. In this case, that's the bullet. So the bullet knows to remove itself from the scene after 5 seconds, and that's very important to do with any bullet-esque object that you're using. I think we're almost done adding components to this guy. We need one more. We need an audio source. Now this fire audio source I actually grabbed out of the asset store. You can find lots of free sound effects online, but the Unity asset store does have some good ones here and there. I found this in Mental Dreams Assets Soldier Sounds pack on the asset store, and the fire the sound effect is the one that I grabbed. And you can, when you see a sound effect, a sound file listed in your project, you can basically just drag it onto any object and that'll create an audio source. But you can also go to add component audio source and add it that way. But if you add an audio source by default from here, source, it doesn't necessarily have an audio clip specified, so you would need to go in and grab an audio clip and drag it and drop it into that clip space. Whereas if you simply just drag the sound file straight onto the object, it'll automatically generate an audio source component and it'll set the clip you desire to the clip for that component. Okay, so now that we have our bullet version 4, we drag the fire sound effect onto it, and there we go. And because it's set to play on awake, whenever we instantiate the bullet into the scene, this fire gun sound effect will sound out at exactly the appropriate time. So it kind of just takes care of itself, which is very convenient. Okay, so now that we've made some updates to our bullet prefab, let's go back to prefabs and update bullet v4 to make sure that everything we just did gets saved as the prefab, not as just an instance. From here, now it's time to create the gun that these bullets are going to fire from. We're going to be very rough with it. We're going to prototype it. If you want something to look really great, you probably want to either work with a 3D modeler. If you're not familiar with a 3D modeling suite like Maya or 3ds Max or any of the others, then find somebody who is familiar with those programs. Or, you know, one of my favorite things to do is go to the asset store, grab some stock assets. Right now I'm just using some primitives to rough in the shape and position of the gun object that we're going to be firing bullets out of. So I've got a a cylinder here. I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to get it in position, zero out the X so that it's lined up with the plane. And this is just a reference so that I can get it roughly the right size and shape, because I'm going to create a prefab out of this. This is not actually attached to the plane right now. If you notice, we have all these objects separately. They're not connected as children of this plane. So if this plane takes off right now, the gun's not going to go with it. And we're going to fix that in a minute. Okay, attach the cube to the gun barrel so that it's all one unit. Now there's one more thing that we need for this to be a complete gun. We need a bullet instantiator object. So I'm going to create empty as a child of the barrel, move it forward so that it's lined up with it. We need it to be pointing in the correct direction because the orientation of this bullet instantiator will determine what direction our bullets are going to fire by default via our script. We can adjust that in the script, but generally when I write a bullet instantiator script, I'll assume that the blue direction of the transform it's attached to is the direction we want to fire the bullet out of by default. And so typically when I set up a bullet instantiator, I'll set the blue arrow forward, and my script, because I just know all my scripts tend to do that, and my script should work automatically. Okay, so now that we have a gun barrel prefab ready to go, let's actually add a fire gun script so that at the right time the bullet will appear right here and will fire out that direction. Fire gun. So if you don't have this script already, I'm going to pop in here and walk you through it so that you could write it on your own. But know that this is on GitHub, so you can just download my script and have it ready to go. So I've exposed two objects in the inspector here, a bullet object and a fire rate. Let's take a look at the bullet object in a second. Just know that this is for the prefab that we've created. So I'm going to drop in our bullet version 4 into that slot, and I'm going to jump into this script so we can see what we're doing with that. This is how our fire gun script knows which object we want to instantiate into the scene. We have this public bullet object reference that I've just mapped to our prefab. And the second one that we've mapped here is the fire rate. So the fire rate is very important. Anytime you're instantiating something on an extremely regular basis, like a rapid fire gun, the problem with Unity is it operates way faster than we can keep up with. So if you're executing something every frame, or even more than that, if you're executing something every engine cycle for the physics engine, it's going to be likely way too fast. So we're not talking rapid fire, we're talking crazy fast rapid fire, so much that you'll have too many bullets in the scene too quickly. If you set a fire rate, you can slow it down. So that's what we're doing here. Instead of as fast as you can, we're going to tell the engine, okay, fire a bullet every 0.1 seconds. So there's going to be 10 bullets firing per second. We'll see how this works in a moment, but that's how we set it. So there's a few things going on in this script that I want you to pay attention to. We're not going to go too deep into each line of code, but know that all of these functions are very clearly commented. You see these gray areas tell you exactly what's going on in this script. So definitely download the script and read through. Even if you don't want to copy and paste my code into your game, you want to write it yourself, read through the notes I've written here if there's any confusion about what this script is doing. So in the start function, first we want to identify which plane we're talking about. Are we talking about the opponent plane here, or are we talking about the player plane over here? Because both of them have a gun. Both of them are going to have the fire gun script attached. We need to be able to identify in the code which one's which. So this is what the jet type does. Now in the fixed update function, and you can use update or fixed update, but generally if you're doing anything with physics, you want to use fixed update because that's what tracks to the physics engine. In update and fixed update, here's where we query the system on a regular basis, every frame, or in this case every physics engine cycle, and ask if certain conditions are met in order to determine whether we want to execute a certain command. So in this case, do we want to fire a bullet? What conditions do we need met in order for that to happen? Well, we need to know that the gun that we're firing in right now is the player's gun. We're not going to deal with the opponent's gun until later. And then we also need to know, is the player pressing the fire button? And that can be whatever button you want. I've mapped it here to the space bar because I just know that jump is automatically mapped to the space bar in Unity. You can map it to anything you want manually by clicking Edit, Project Settings, Input, and over here that'll open the input manager, and sometimes this will be closed down, but you just drop down axes and you see there's a whole bunch of different commands that you can map to whatever button you want. In this case, jump is already mapped to spacebar, and you can change that to a different button if you'd like to, but I just leave it there because I know it's a quick, easy button to get access to. And so if the jet type is player and the player is pressing the jump button right now, consider firing. And the consider firing function is the last thing in this script. It's the only thing that I'm doing here aside from firing the bullet is checking the fire rate. So whatever I wrote here, I think we wrote 0.2 seconds. Let's see, 0.1 seconds. Every 0.1 seconds we're allowed to fire the gun. And so consider firing just asks, are we allowed to fire the gun? And every 0.1 seconds the system says yes, and then all the time in between it says no, 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 and then after 0.1 seconds it says yes again. So every time it says yes, we're going to use these lines of code here to fire the gun. This one pops a new bullet into the scene at the exact position and rotation of the parent object, the instantiator, and then this line of code tells it, okay, now that you're in the scene, you need to exit the gun and fly forward at a certain rate. So we set its velocity here, and because the rigid body defines the physics of the object, this is why we need fixed update and not update, because we're manipulating physics here. Okay, and then the very last thing that happens here is just to reset the fire rate. Now that we've fired a bullet, don't let another bullet fire in the very next frame. We got to wait until that 0.1 seconds has passed again. So this resets the fire rate so that we can properly get permission for it on the next pass. So that's the entire fire gun script, and I believe now that that's in place, we should be able to create a prefab out of the gun barrel, attach it to each of these guns, and we should be able to pull the trigger. Let's do that. Here we go. Prefabs, gun barrel. I'm going to drop this in. You can see I've done this several times. I've got lots of gun barrels here, but if you imagine you hadn't done this before, then you would just call this whatever you want. I'm going to call it version 5 because I've got 4 other times I've tried this. And now that I have a prefab, I don't really need this guy in the scene, except if you notice, I have him set to a certain position. But I don't necessarily know whenever I bring the prefab back in if that's the position I'm going to want it to be in. Because as we've seen with other prefabs, this is going to create an offset from wherever I drop this prefab onto. And so if I leave this here and go with that as my prefab, there's going to be an offset. Watch this. If I delete this guy, and then I grab the prefab and drop him onto the aircraft jet, you see there's an offset. He jumped forward because I left this offset in there. So I'm gonna go into the prefab. I'm gonna zero out the offset. I'm going to delete the instance that I just created. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to drop the prefab onto the jet AI, and you see it starts at the jet's origin, and that, for any given jet, that'll allow me to get the object kind of closer to where I wanted it. Now you might say, well, you already had it in the right place, and that's true, but I had an instance in the right place. I didn't have the prefab in the right place, and that's a very important distinction. Okay, whoops. So I've resized it a little bit because the prefab will assume some of the properties of its parent when you drop it into the scene, but it may or may not be quite the right transform properties. I'm going to do the same thing to the player jet. So we see now the player jet now has a gun. We've used the same prefab template to create it. All we got to do is resize it a little bit and position it, and we should be good to go. Let's make it a little smaller because this guy is quite a bit smaller than the other guy. Okay, so now that both of them have gun barrels, we should be able to get into the game and start firing the bullets right off the bat. Let's bring the game view in, hit play, and see if this thing works. Okay, so it works quite well. Let's see if anything happens when we shoot the opponent. So you saw it hit him, but he didn't explode. He just kind of turned the other way. The bullets knocked him off of his regular course, but he's definitely still alive after that. That's what we're going to do in the next video. We're going to figure out how to allow the bullets to actually cause the plane to explode. So stick around. That part's going to be fun too.